السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، أما بعد. الكبيرة الثانية والعشرون, the 22nd major sin out of 70. الغلول من الغنيمة ومن بيت المال ومن الزكاة. غلول is to take something without due right, misappropriating something that is valuable without due right. And so this one is specific to taking from, number one, the spoils of war, number two, from the treasury of Muslims, and number three, from the wealth that is collected for zakat. So these are three different types. This is a form of injustice, and we are going to look perhaps today or next week that one major sin is injustice, but injustice has different levels. And to emphasize the greatness of certain sins, they have not been grouped, because you could just group them all under, theft, for example, because it is a form of theft. But the author, rahmatullah alayh, has mentioned them individually because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there are certain ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about these particular crimes or sins. And so one of them that we looked earlier on in our discussions is aklu mali al-yatim, to take the property of the orphan. And we said this is a great injustice because in general, the people who will take the wealth of the orphan are family members. And so it is a sort of theft. But the fact that it is between family members, where there should be trust and care, and number two is that you are taking wealth from somebody that has no power to retaliate, or perhaps not even understanding to know what is being done. And so they are in a vulnerable position. Okay? And that's why that is sort of mentioned actually in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically says, those who eat the wealth of the orphans, إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا, they are consuming hellfire. And so this is ghulul. This is known as ghulul. And the term actually comes from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَمَا كَانَ لِنَبِيٍّ أَنْ يَغُلْ, that it is not befitting for a prophet or a messenger to act dishonestly, to be dishonest. Right? It is not appropriate, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made prophets and messengers role models, and He beautified them with the character of justice and mercy. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَغْلُلْ يَأْتِ بِمَا غَلَّ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Anyone who is dishonest will bring their dishonesty with them on the Day of Judgment. And so whatever is taken dishonestly, either by theft or by applying pressure on somebody or by taking it by force, whatever is taken will be brought on the Day of Judgment. So a person will be carrying that, and it will be a way of punishing this person on the Day of Qiyamah. And also the author says or states the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْخَائِنِينَ. Allah does not love those who are treacherous, right? Those who cheat others. They are not love to Allah. Allah loves honesty. He doesn't love or He despises rather those who lie and those who cheat. And this is why Rasulullah, the general hadith to remember is, Man ghashana falaysa minna. anyone who cheats us, meaning anyone who cheats our community, then that person will not be considered from amongst our community on the day of Qiyamah. They will not have access to the intercession of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this is, and so this is a form of theft. But because you are taking from public wealth, unfortunately this is very common now in the Muslim world, people who are in a position of authority and have access to public wealth that belongs to all the Muslims, or at least the Muslims of that state, use it like it is their own savings, and as if it was sort of accumulated or by their parents, and so it is a form of theft. But adding to that you are taking from wealth that is for the community, that is supposed to be for the benefit of the community, and so you are not harming one person by taking it. Like if I take Sulaiman's phone, I only harm Sulaiman. Maybe I don't, he gets a better phone. But anyway, it's only one person. But when you take from public funds, you are harming a number of people that are deserving of that wealth. And so that happens mainly in 3 occasions. These are the main, but there could be others that are similar to it and will fall under this category. The first one is the spoils of war. So generally in the past, I don't know if this applies to today, but in the past, when 2 armies had a conflict and they fought a war, and one side is defeated, and so the whoever has the victory will take the belongings of those who have been defeated. So generally it's anything valuable, but in general it's horses and camels in those days, horses, camels, weapons, and perhaps gold and silver, and at times clothing and things of that sort. So this is one. Number 2, Baytul Mal. Baytul Mal is the treasury of the Muslims, right? And so this is not, generally it will not be accessible to anyone. It will be accessible to the people who are placed as trustees over that wealth. Okay? And we see this, an example of and Baytul Mal al-Muslimin, like in our day and age, you would say that, okay, Muslims living in Europe and having left Muslim countries, we don't have public fund, but we do have access to waqf. So when we come to the masjid, this is waqf. And so taking something from the masjid is not like taking something from Sulaiman or from Muhammad or from Ali or from anybody. You are not taking what belongs to another person, but rather what belongs to Allah. And so generally we don't take from the masjid. Very few individuals who have iman and belief would actually do that. But we have heard horror stories, people who are in charge of charities and masajid who have access to accounts and what have you, and use the money as they please for their own personal needs, or not even using the actual not using the wealth itself, but using their trusteeship over that wealth in order to benefit themselves, right? Because if you are a trustee of a large charity and you have, mashallah, big income, and you have ways in which you can access a large amount of loans because you are in this position. And so that is not appropriate. You are using the wealth of the masjid that is waqf in order to benefit from it personally. And so generally we don't do that. But what we do is that when we come to the masjid, we are careless. We're careless with water. We're careless with lighting. We're careless with heating. Charging phones. Allahu Akbar. People just come and plug it in and it's like, no problem. There's no harm, every now and then you kind of, you are in the masjid for a long time, or, you were traveling and you don't have, and you've got a child. Absolutely. But then you've got to think, who's paying that? And who does it belong to? It belongs to the community. And so the community is all contributing for the use of the masjid as a place of worship. Okay? And so if I have used anything for my personal self, then I should make a small contribution. I can charge my phone. But contribute 50 pence, £1 to the masjid, put that in the box, and that will cover you.
Is it the same as a mosque?
Is it the same as the mosque is, we've kind of put it there for people to use. But yeah, generally people should bring their own mosques. Yeah. Yeah, so this is not, and this is not exclusive to the masjid. And this is important too, my brothers. It's not exaggerating. You don't want to come on the day of Qiyamah with tissues from McDonald's and sugar from Costa. People just go and grab a bunch and just place it in their pocket. And you're not. It's there for the use for, you've taken a coffee, and maybe you're going to spill some or whatever, or you're going to need to clean your hands after. Take one, take two. Don't take a whole bunch. Just because they're made available doesn't mean. You have to think. If that was your own business, is that costing you? Would you be happy that somebody walks in and just takes 4 or 5 and maybe don't even buy anything and just walk away? Yeah? And so we have to be careful in how we, and this is back to your own conscience. Yeah? Parking. You park in the supermarket. Supermarket specifically says that this parking is for what? For customers. At the you park there for 2 hours. Okay, you've gone to see a friend or whatever. At the very least, go inside, make yourself a customer. Right? On the day of Qiyamah, you don't have to worry about, coming with God knows what around your neck. So, a believer has to be conscious, right? If it does not belong to you, then you've got to give what is due. But especially when it comes to the masjid. Because then it is waqf. And waqf is generally defined in easy words. It is anything that has been given for the sake of Allah. And so nobody has it doesn't belong to any one individual, and it doesn't even belong to the entire community. It belongs to Allah. There is no owner to waqf. And yes, it is the community that is contributing. You're thinking to yourself, well, I give, £50 a month, or I contribute £20 a month to the masjid. And so, yes, when you're contributing, that is your wealth for you giving it for the sake of Allah. But once it enters the pot, it belongs to Allah. It doesn't belong to anyone. Not the community, not the imam, not the trustees, not the employees, no one. It belongs to Allah. And so when you come into the masjid, and ideally a person should be making wudu in their home. That is the best, okay? And the provision that is there is for, obviously a person is traveling or going from here and there, or coming to the masjid, they break their wudu, or they realize when they come to the masjid. But generally, all the ahadith of Rasulullah tell us what? The person who makes wudu then comes out for the masjid, or to the masjid. Okay, so that is the ideal position. But if we are going to make use of things in the masjid, then we have to be cautious and careful, right? I come in on my own, there is no need to put in the lights of the entire building. Yeah? And so this would fall under this category, but it's even more severe, because you are taking from wealth that belongs only to Allah and has no ownership. Yes?
Just a quick one. Let's say this particular mosque, somebody has made niyyah to give money to this mosque, and he's given it to a third person. And that third person gives it somewhere else to another mosque. Is that what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. So the question is that if a person has taken something from the masjid and
no, if third person has given niyyah to give money to this particular mosque.
Okay.
And then
Yeah, it doesn't matter because all masajid belong to Allah. So let's say, for example, somebody gave me, a certain amount of money and says, "Can you please put this in North Finchley Masjid?" And I forgot, and I gave it to, I don't know, some masjid, Hendon Masjid, for example. Then what happens? But it'll be acceptable because at the end of the day, all the masajid belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But ideally, if a person remembers, then they should put it into the masjid that.
So that's not considered misappropriation?
No, it won't. Not if it's not done intentionally. Yeah, somebody's putting up a bottle of water. Right, water is made available in the masjid. This is a very bad habit that we have. It's made available. You take a bottle, alhamdulillah, drink from it, alhamdulillah. You don't finish it, take it home. Leave it lying around. Who's going to drink from it? And that is wasting what? Ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the cleaner that's going to come around is just going to pick it up and put it in the bin. And now the person has gone through so much effort, because it's not the masjid that buys the water. Somebody goes through so much effort and they say, you know what, I'm going to buy water for the musallin, for their comfort. And we're careless, not appreciative of the effort, not appreciative of the service that somebody has done in order for you to be comfortable when you come to the masjid for your worship. Okay, so we said taking the spoils of war, and the second taking public funds, and will fall under this also. Even if the public funds is the funds that are government funds, right? It's still public fund. Okay, it's not specific to just a Muslim state or a Muslim country. It's more severe if you take the wealth that belongs to the Muslim, but even taking the wealth that belongs to a public that is non-Muslim is haram and a major sin. And zakat, taken from zakat. This is again specific to, mostly in our sort of setting, the people who work in charities, right? They work in charities, they're made responsible for zakat. And so they have a great duty and responsibility not to abuse their position and taking. And so Imam Al-Dhahabi rahmatullah alayhi brings a narration of Imam Muslim, narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that Rasulullah once he stood to give advice and admonish Sahaba, and he mentioned ghulul, this misappropriating the wealth of public wealth or wealth of zakat or spoils of war. فَعَظَّمَهُ وَعَظَّمَ أَمْرَهُ. And Rasulullah made it, emphasized it, that we understood that this is a very big sin. Okay, ta'zim is to glorify something or make it seem great. And then he said that, and I'm paraphrasing, that I should not find one of you coming on the day of Qiyamah with a camel around his neck. And so it seems like, what sort of punishment is that? But when you think about it, you are stood 50,000 years, naked, hungry, barefooted, in extreme heat, thirsty, and then on top of that you got to carry something. You got your own load, and then on top of that you are carrying what? Whatever you have taken, you will carry. And the Rasulullah said this person will come with, you'll have people coming with, this is mentioning the time then, right? Carrying a camel. Today a person of today will be carrying a car, or I don't know, a house or a piece of land around his neck, and will come to me and ask me that, Ya Rasulullah, asking for intercession, help me. And I will say, no, I warned you. And then he mentions a horse and so on and so forth. And so Rasulullah says that I will not be able, the moral of the hadith or the teaching of the hadith is that I will not intercede in the favor of somebody that has taken public wealth or wealth of zakah. Also, there is a hadith of somebody who was employed, Ibn al-Lutaybah. This is a person that Rasulullah ﷺ employed for zakat, collection of zakat. Okay, so the Muslim state would generally employ people, to collect, like you have your tax man. Yeah, so the zakat man, a person who goes around and collects zakat. And this is a full-time job because they're continuously always going to people. And so they're paid from the zakah. Yeah? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. The third category of people mentioned in the verse is وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا, أي الْعَامِلِينَ عَلَى الصَّدَقَةِ or عَامِلِينَ عَلى الزَّكَاةِ. That the people who are employed to collect zakah have a share of the zakah. Yeah? Because they are working to ensure that everybody is paying their zakah, and that is taking their full time, their time, and they cannot have their earnings, and so for that reason. Anyway, so this person has been employed, so he already has what? A wage for his work. Right? He's paid for his work. When he returned, he gave Rasulullah some wealth, and brought some wealth with him, and he said, "This is for you and this is mine." So he wasn't trying to cheat. This is he was being honest in, he brought, let's say for example, £1,000, and then he said to Rasulullah, £900 is yours and £100 is mine. So Rasulullah said, how is that? He said, well, that is zakat, the person paid zakah, and then they gave me £100 as a gift. Rasulullah said, that is not permissible. You cannot take that, because this what does this open the door to? Corruption. He's responsible for collecting zakah. So if I give him a little gift, maybe he'll take a little bit less zakah. And so Rasulullah closed the door of this, that you are paid for your services. You shouldn't take extra earnings. No. Right? And that is not a gift, because you already have,
Tips.
Yeah. No, tips is a different thing. A tip is not in relation to zakah. It's like, there is that is a gift additional to, because of the way somebody has, they've taken care of you in a nice way, and something that they went the extra mile, and maybe give them. Huh? Yeah, they do have wages, but actually in the hospitality thing, it's kind of an accepted, they have a tips pot or what have you, and so it's an acceptable thing. But here Rasulullah did not allow it, and so the hadith says, لما استعمل ابن اللتيبة على الصدقة وقدم قال هذا لكم وهذا أهدي لي. He said, Ya Rasulullah, this is zakat and this is a gift for me. فصعد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم المنبر. So Rasulullah stood on the minbar immediately, and this shows the importance of the matter. He didn't say, oh, Friday I'll mention it in a khutbah. No, immediately Rasulullah went on the minbar. فحمد الله وأثنى عليه. He praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he said, والله لا يأخذ أحد منكم منها شيئا بغير حق إلا جاء يوم القيامة يحمله. Anyone who takes from zakat anything without a due right, he will come on the day of Qiyamah carrying it. لأعرفن رجل منكم لقي الله يحمل بعيرا له رغاء أو بقرة لها خوار أو شاة تيعر ثم رفع يديه فقال اللهم هل بلغت. And this is similar to the previous narration, that Rasulullah says that I can see people carrying, a person coming on the day of Qiyamah with carrying a camel or carrying a cow or a sheep, and then he raised his hands and he said, Ya Allah, I have fulfilled my responsibility in informing them, meaning the importance of zakat and taking away from zakat. And then there is a narration about a person who was in the service of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His name was Karkara. and he passed away. And so Rasulullah said, this person is in hellfire. So, seemingly that person did not do anything wrong. He was a Muslim and fulfilled major principles of Islam. But when and this was in the time of war, and they looked through his things and they found that he had misappropriated a cloak. Can you imagine? A cloak from the spoils of war that he took, something he liked, and he took, and perhaps he was in need of it. You don't know. He might have taken it because it was a cold night, and but he took it without permission. That is what it's. The spoils of war are public funds, or rather, they belong to everybody that has taken part in the expedition or the war. Likewise, there is a hadith that on the day of Khaybar, or in the battle of Khaybar, a person took something from the spoils. Rasulullah refused to pray Salatul Janazah. This is a shaheed. He died at war. And Rasulullah, and he's a believer. There's nothing that says, he was a munafiq. No, but, everybody has greed. And so, he was a sahabi, somebody who prayed and fulfilled the obligations. And not even that, he came out in jihad. And died, and Rasulullah refused to offer his janazah and said, Inna sahibakum ghalla fi sabilillah. And so it's such a major sin that Allah informed Rasulullah and inspired him that you are not to pray over this person. Right? And this is specific to the munafiqeen generally, because Allah said in general terms, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ. That the known munafiqeen, because Rasulullah had a list revealed by Allah, the names of the munafiqeen of Medina. And so Allah said to him that you are not permitted to offer their janazah or to even visit their grave, because they are munafiq. They are worse than kuffar. Other than that, Rasulullah was not known to refuse offering the funeral salah of somebody. There are a few occasions where this happened, and this is an example of it, when a person took from the spoils of war. And Imam Ahmad rahmatullah alayhi says, ما نعلم أن النبي امتنع من الصلاة على أحد إلا على الغال وقاتل نفسه. Two people that we have narrations that Rasulullah refused to offer their janazah. Number one is the one who took from the spoils of war without permission, without due right, and the one who committed suicide. Yeah. I think this is a person who at war he had fought fiercely, and people praised him and praised his courage, and somebody said, oh, this person is going to be a martyr in paradise, and Rasulullah said, no, I have been inspired that this person is in hellfire. And so they went looking for him, and they found that he had been injured, and due to the pain of the injury, he could not take the pain, and so he committed suicide. Rasulullah refused to pray janazah. There are people who committed adultery and were faced the capital punishment and died, and Rasulullah offered their janazah. Another narration, and this is a sahih narration, that Rasulullah said, هَدَايَا الْعُمَّالِ غُلُولٌ. The presents or gifts that are given to ummal are general terms employees, but here public servants. Right? Ummal is isti'mal in the language or the era or the time of Rasulullah, it is somebody that is selected for a duty of the state, right? It's not ummal. Doesn't, in general terms, ummal is anybody that an employee is a amil, but here it means what? People who are working for the state. For them to take gifts for the services that they already paid to do, ghululun. This is very common, especially in our countries. You can't get a passport without a few notes here and there. Right? And this is ghulul. Why? Because the person is paid for that. And this, why is it, what's the big deal? Because you are encouraging bribery and corruption. Because when this person, the employee, gets used to taking money for the services that he's already paid, a job that he's already paid to do, what's going to happen is, you come along, you give £10 and I do your work. You come along, you give £20 and I do your work twice faster. And then you come along and you don't have anything. And so, what's my interest in doing your work? I'm just going to ignore you and go to the next one. Why would I do it for free? And the worst thing is that these people then legitimize it. And they say it as, there's nothing wrong. Why? Because they are raised in a culture of corruption where it's acceptable. And so, Islam aimed to eradicate all forms of corruption and injustice, so that people have access to public services equally. And this is actually some of the major things that the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was praised for, or Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, is that people had access to, anyone had access to the Khalifa. There was not even, and the Rasulullah, we talked about the ruler who has a responsibility and who places people between him and his subjects and does not allow his subjects to approach him. Then this person is going to be questioned on the day of Qiyamah. Because he's employed to serve. Okay, there has to be a certain rule and etiquette and what have you. It's not sort of, a person does not become open to all and for all. And there are instances where Umar radiallahu anhu got angry with someone. And he said, you know my working time. Essentially, that's what he said. He said, I have a working shift. And that's dedicated to public service or services. And then I have my private time. I can't be available at all times. I'm not saying this, huh? Umar said this. Well, even I can't be available at all times. But yeah, so, just because somebody is doing something for Allah or because they are given a responsibility for the sake of Allah, it doesn't mean they are accessible anytime you want. Yeah? And he said, what? You know my hours. This is the time I sit to deal with the complaints of people, and people can approach me and speak to me in these specific times. And then I have, my family time and my rest time. And so, but essentially that's what his time of Khilafah was praised for. That, there was access whenever needed to the ruler, and there was access to the services. Not only that, there is a statement that Umar radiallahu anhu used to sit and eat from, public, I don't know what you would call them, but, meals that are made available for the public, right? For the poor and needy and whatever.
No.
Huh?
No.
What do you mean?
I said no. We never ate from the people. No, we never.
Okay, maybe you misunderstood me. So, you had the people of Sufa in the masjid of Rasulullah, and so people will bring food. Like here, people bring food, sometimes cooked food. Soup kitchen, things like that. Okay, so when people would bring food, and Umar radiallahu anhu was a Muslim like others, right? And he would eat with them like everybody else. And people would eat in big platters. And so he would always ask that his portion would be set to the side, because he said that I am bigger in size and I'm afraid that I will eat more than other people, and people will not be able to say anything because I'm the Khalifa. And so I will get to, right? He saw that as injustice. There is a story of Umar radiallahu anhu going out, and he was walking around in Medina, and he saw some camels, and they looked, fat and, well fed. And he said, "Oh, whose camels are these?" And somebody said, "They are the camels of your son, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." So he called him, And he said, why are camels, they look better than, the other camels? I said, I don't know. He said, where did you get them from? He said, my personal wealth. He said, they are your personal wealth, but they are grazing in public grounds. And people are saying that these are the camels of the Khalifa, so, give them a nice green patch. Because of that, he said, put them in Baytul Mal and take their price. Okay, their value in the market. So, la darara wa la dirar. You don't harm others, but you don't harm yourself. So these are some examples. And all of this, and this is what Imam Al-Dhahabi rahmatullah alayhi concludes this chapter with. He says, all of this comes under the hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam made the khutbah in Hajjatul Wada', and he said, Inna dima'akum, your blood, wa amwalakum, blood meaning your life. Inna dima'akum wa amwalakum, and your wealth, wa a'radakum, and your honor, alaykum haramun, are prohibited. Haram is something that you are not allowed to approach. And so the wealth of everyone is haram, and the honor of every person is haram, and the life of every person is haram. We are all equal in this. The Khalifa, the Qadi, the Imam, the scholar, the general Muslim, the Fasiq, right? And even the Dhimmi falls actually in a Muslim state. Even the Dhimmi, even the non-Muslim that is under the protection of the Muslim state, that person's life and honor and property are protected by Islam. كَحُرْمَةِ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا. The sacredness of life, property and wealth is like the sacredness of the day of Arafah. This was in the day of Arafah. Like the sacredness of this day of yours, meaning the day of Arafah. في شهركم هذا, in this month, which was the month of Dhul Hijjah, sacred month. في بلدكم هذا. And so it's sacredness upon sacredness upon sacredness. It was in Mecca, or in sacred grounds, and sacred month and sacred day. And so he says, Imam Al-Dhahabi rahmatullah alayhi, he says, in general, injustice will be categorized in three major categories. The one, doing injustice by taking wealth or somebody's property or belongings without due right. The second type is a sort of physical injustice. One is relating to wealth. One is physical attack and murder, hitting someone, breaking someone, injuring someone, breaking the limbs of a person. This is what? Physical violence. This is injustice. And then you have ظلم العباد. And then also included in injustice is verbal abuse. Okay, so you have verbal abuse, and then you have physical abuse, and then you have what you're going to call it, monetary abuse or whatever, taking somebody's wealth. These are the three major categories of dhulm and injustice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ اللَّهَ غَافِلًا عَمَّا يَعْمَلُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Do not think that Allah is unaware of the actions of the unjust, the transgressors. Don't think that Allah is unaware, because they seem to be getting away with it. They do it the first time small, and then a little bit bigger, and then they get confident and take more and more and more and oppress more people. And it all comes from what? It comes from a sense of pride, and that you start to think in the beginning, you do it once, twice, and then you think you're entitled to it and you deserve it for some reason, right? So it's a sense of pride, it's greed, right? Self gratifying your, whatever your desires are, whatever you want, in terms of material, and disregarding people and belittling people. حقارة تحقير الخلق, that you belittle somebody, you take their wealth because they have nobody to defend them. But who is the defender of the unjust? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if that the defender of the one who's treated with injustice, the mazlum, the oppressed, even if they are non-Muslim, doesn't matter. Why? Because they are creation of Allah. Allah created them. Allah gave them life. Allah gave them wealth. Allah gave them their honor. And so when you extend your hand to it without permission from Allah, you are extending your hand to something that belongs to Allah. And so all are equal in this. Yes, if there is due right, then it's a different matter. Okay, the next one is theft. And this is the major sin number 23. Theft is defined in Islam specific. It has a specific definition. It is to take something that is placed in a secret place. So a person is protecting something of value and you take it. Okay, so let's say, for example, if I just left my phone here carelessly and somebody came along and said, oh yeah, phone, took it away. This will not be considered as theft. It's wrong, it's haram, it doesn't belong to them. But the capital punishment of theft will not apply. Why? Because I failed to do what? And today, even your insurance will not pay you if you left your keys in the car and then you say, oh, somebody stole my car. So, well, that's because of your carelessness. Okay, negligence. And yes, and so sariqa is really taking something that belongs to someone and they are protecting it, whether it is in their pocket or whether it is in their home or whether it is in a safe or whatever, right? So it's generally hidden and protected, and you have gone and extended your hand to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very clearly says in the Quran, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ, that the thief, whether man, whether male or female, فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا, cut their hands. Their two hands. Meaning that it is the same punishment applicable to a man and a woman. It doesn't mean that both hands will be cut. It's just one hand. فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا جَزَاءً بِمَا كَسَبَا, due to their what? And we said previously that capital punishment only applies to those sins that are what? That have? No. Capital punishment in Islam applies to the sins that affect society. You do something between you and Allah, nobody's, but this affect, it has an impact on, you go and steal somebody and then they justify and they say, well, it was stolen from me, so I'll go and steal from somebody else. Right? And so when you transgress against other people, then Islam applies this sort of ruling. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا جَزَاءً بِمَا كَسَبَا نَكَالًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ, as a punishment from Allah. وَاللَّهُ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. Allah is the holder of Aziz. Izzah is honor, and Hakim is wisdom. And there is a story about this, that a Bedouin, somebody was reading Quran, and a Bedouin was sitting next to him, and in that time, Bedouins took pride in their eloquence. Right? They had a purer form of Arabic than the people that lived in the city, because people who lived in the city, they came from different sort of backgrounds, and so there will be some Roman, some Persian, and all of it mixed with the Arabic language. Like they take words from here, words from there, just like we do in the English language. We take some words from French and some words from other languages. And so this Bedouin is sitting down and somebody's reading the Quran, and he reads this verse and he says, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ, the thief, male or female, cut their hands because of their doing, نَكَالًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ, as a punishment from Allah or retaliation from Allah. وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ, and Allah is most forgiving, most merciful. So the Bedouin said, oh, what are you reading? This cannot be Quran. This is a mistake. And so the person realized and said, oh yeah, actually the verse is Wallahu Azizun Hakim, that Allah is the owner of might and wisdom. And he says, yeah, this is more appropriate. He said, are you Hafiz of Quran? You know this verse? He said, no. He said, then how do you know? He said, well, if Allah says cut their hand, He's not going to say at the end of the verse that He's most forgiving, most merciful. If He was forgiving and merciful to that extent, then He would not tell you to cut their hand. But might and wisdom is appropriate. Why? Because Allah is asking you to implement this capital punishment for a hikmah. There is wisdom behind it, as a deterrent for other people. Right? And when Allah mentions might, is that if you don't want to do it, if you don't do it, then I will do it. On the day of Qiyamah, they'll come to me and I will ultimately punish them. And so Allah doesn't need you to, He's not asking you to do it for Him in the sense that He benefits from you cutting or applying a capital punishment on someone. You are the ones that will benefit. Your societies will benefit. And perhaps one of the reasons for the rise of the crime and the intensity of crime today is that punishment is very, it's not light, but it's so-called bearable. When it's not, then it will become a deterrent. But if you put a person behind bars and you give them to eat and drink, yes, there is, being in prison is not an easy matter. I've worked for the prison service, and it's a difficult thing. Your freedom is the most important aspect of your life. And so if you are caged up and you're told when to sleep, what to eat, what to do, and you between four walls all the time, there is a emotional and psychological sort of punishment in that. But that's not going to stop people from, clearly, it doesn't stop people from crime. But applying the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is the wisdom behind the hudud of Allah. And so anybody, these champions of human rights and what have you, okay, fair enough, that is your view and that's what you think. But the one who created this tells us this is what will work. If you want to protect your society, this is what will work. You want to do it, do it. You don't want to do it, then you face the consequences. Exactly. People commit a crime and then they come out of jail and they say rehabilitated, and then they commit the same crime on a larger scale. And so they go in with an A level in crime and come out with a PhD in crime, and they've got all the connection, all the resources, and all the experience there available to them. Different. This person has a specialist in this, and that one's specialist, and they learn from everyone, and they come out and commit more crime. Only very few, illa man rahimallah. Some people, do make a change. And often it is said that this is a failure of the justice system or the government. It's not. It's the failure of a society that refuses to implement what? What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises for our own good.
But,
No,
even
it is hudud can be stopped in circumstances and of substance. إلا من اضطر.
Yeah. There are absolutely. Hudud are actually very, very sensitive.
He needs, so you don't have to put him in the prison.
Yeah, but most people who steal, who are in prison, they don't steal out of need. What need is there with benefit system?
Not
And
all of them. Not all of them.
I agree, not all of them. And so the capital punishment does not apply to every person who commits the crime. You have to look at mitigating circumstances, and at times a person will be punished, but not to the extent of the capital punishment, because they don't actually fall under that category. And this is what we will see, that Rasulullah defined theft and defined when a person will receive capital punishment. And Aisha radiallahu anha says, in the quarter of a dinar. And so if somebody stole something that was worth 3 dirhams, or the quarter of a dinar. So dirham is a silver coin. Dinar is a gold coin, right? And 1 dinar was equal to 12 dirhams. And so if a person stole 3 dirhams and above, Rasulullah said, cut their hand. But it has to be determined that that person did not steal out of need and necessity. If they are really in poverty and they've stolen, and this is a famous story I think I've mentioned before, that somebody stole from the private wealth of Harun al-Rashid. There was a caravan with his wealth coming from one place to another, and it had food and clothing and what have you. And so somebody stole from it. And this person was brought in his court, and ulama was sitting there. And he said, did you steal from the wealth of Amir al-Mu'mineen? He said, yes, I did. So he asked the fuqaha, he said, what do you think? And they said, well, the capital punishment applies. He stole more than 3 dirhams, the value of more than 3 dirhams, and he's acknowledged and accepted it. And one person spoke and said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, can I speak? Can I say my verdict? He said, yes. And so he asked the man, he said, why did you steal from, didn't you realize this is the wealth of the Khalifa? Like, you had nobody else to steal from. He said, yeah, I realized, but I thought the Khalifa is so wealthy, he's not going to miss a bag of, he stole dates and flour or something of that sort. A bag of food. He has so much wealth. Oh, so, and why did he said, I have a large family, young children, I don't have any work. And I just, it was necessity to feed them. And so this person says to the Khalifa, you want to hear my verdict? He said, yes. He said, I think the capital punishment for all this is that your head should be removed. Because why is there a man with a family suffering, and children are suffering hunger to the extent that what? And this is in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. There was a period where Umar radiallahu anhu cancelled out the capital punishment of theft. Because it was a difficult time and people did not have... It was a year where there was no famine, no rain, and obviously the economy of Medina was based on growth or agriculture, and because there was nothing, people suffered, and in that suffering, Umar radiallahu anhu says, we stop the implementation of the capital punishment. It doesn't mean that the person who steals in that time will not be punished, but they cannot. This does not apply on them. And when he was asked, why do you stop something that Allah ordered us to do? He said, we have to fulfill, as a state, we have to fulfill our duty to people, and then we ask of them to follow the rules and the laws.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, نَكَالًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَزِيزٌ Hakim, that this is a retribution from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this capital punishment, and Allah is the owner of might and wisdom. And a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that shows the gravity of theft, that he said that the person who commits zina is not a believer while committing zina. And we've explained this before, that the iman is extracted from that person and it hovers over them. It cannot stay inside your iman, cannot be within your body whilst you are committing these major sins. The first one is zina. The second one is theft. وَلَا يَسْرِقُ السَّارِقُ حِينَ يَسْرِقُ وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ. And when a person is stealing, they are not a believer in that time. And it makes sense. Because a believer is a person who believes in Allah. And part of our belief in Allah is that Allah has written your rizq for you. Your provision has been written for you. And it is to be taken from lawful source. And so when you go and take somebody else's wealth, you are saying to Allah that you did not write enough for me. I don't accept what you have written for me. And so because of that, I'm going to take what you have written for somebody else. And so you'd think, like, what's the relationship of theft with belief? But actually, when you look deep into it, it's a weakness in belief that leads to committing this major sin, theft. And then there is a certain a number of ahadith, like we said, that specify the amount of 3 dirhams and anything above that in relation to theft. One very important hadith here is that Aisha radiallahu anha said that كانت مخزومية تستعير المتاع وتجحده. There was a woman from Bani Makhzumiyah, a woman living in the Medinan society or community, and she used to borrow things. You know, I heard a comedian making joke about this, that what did he say? He says, has anybody experienced someone borrowing something from them for so long that they have to borrow it back? Do you understand? So I borrow something from Umar, but I've kept it for so long that he has to borrow it back from me. You know, he's forgotten that it belonged to him. And so this is what this woman would do. You know, she'll borrow something and say, oh, sister, and she did this too. Obviously, women, you know, take a brush from here or take a pot from there. The women of Medina in the time of Rasulullah, there's no wealth, okay? Medina was suffering in that time. Economically, it was poverty, generally. So it was what? She was taking things from people. Like, she wasn't taking millions. You know, some item of clothing, or maybe something to utilize at home, or, you know, some furniture or something like that. And so she used to take things, and then she used to deny. And so when somebody comes to her and says, can I have my, you know, pot back, or, you know, whatever it is, she'd deny it and say, no, you didn't give me anything.
This is deliberate.
Deliberate, yeah.
Deliberate
Yeah.
stealing, really.
Yeah, it is. Because without asking to borrow, you would not have access to that. And so you are asking for a favor, and then you are using that against the person. So Rasulullah commanded that her hand should be cut. Like, you know, she did it time and time again. And obviously, if it reaches Rasulullah, he has to rule by the Quran. And so he ordered.
Which hand? Is it
The right hand.
the right hand?
Yes.
Maybe one is left hand.
Oh, well, then we'll have to. It's the hand they use. Right? That's the idea. And so people did what? They wanted somebody to intercede in her favor. You know, somebody to have a word with the Rasulullah. Look, it's a woman, and, you know, small things, and she didn't really mean it, or whatever. She was a woman of standing in her community. And so they said, well, what can we really apply this punishment? And so they spoke. Who's going to have a word with Rasulullah? Nobody has the courage to come, because they know Rasulullah's position when it comes to matter of deen. Aisha radiallahu anha said that Rasulullah never took revenge for himself. Never. But when it was a matter of Sharia and a matter relating to Allah, then the anger of Rasulullah would not subdue until the right of Allah was re-established. So they thought, and they selected who? Usama ibn Zayd. Usama ibn Zayd, obviously Zayd was the adopted son of Rasulullah. He was the slave that he had, and then he freed him, adopted him. And the son of Zayd was Usama. And so he was known as the son of the beloved of Rasulullah, or the beloved of the beloved of Rasulullah. He was very close to Rasulullah. He loved him a great deal. But 2 occasions Rasulullah, when it came to the matter of deen and the Sharia of Allah, then there is no relationship. And so they spoke to Usama and said, please have a word with the Rasulullah, see if he will change his mind about this verdict of applying capital punishment on this woman. So when he came and spoke to Rasulullah, he said, Ya Usama, لا أراك تشفع في حد من حدود الله. He said, Usama, I will never see you, I will not bear to see you interceding in the favor of somebody on whom the capital punishment of Allah applies. Basically, you're better than that. This is a matter that it's Allah. What are you asking me? It's not in my hand. This is the rule of Allah. Why are you asking me? ثم قام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم خطيبا. Then Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم stood and gave a sermon, and he said, إنما هلك من كان قبلكم. Previous nations who received Sharia from Allah, and this is specific to Bani Israel, Yahud of Bani Israel, that they were destroyed because when insignificant people committed a crime, people of low standing in society committed a crime, they would apply they'll throw the book at them, like they say, right? So they apply the punishment, very severe, and okay, this is the Sharia of Allah. But when people of standing in the community, then they did what? They brushed it under the carpet. Oh, it's okay, this person is, he's the ruler, or this person is noble, or... So he said, previous nations were destroyed because when the noble amongst them committed theft, they left him. And when the lowly or the weak committed theft, they applied the capital punishment. And this is, then he said, and this is the famous words of Rasulullah, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ, I swear by the one who holds my soul in his hand. And so Rasulullah was not one to swear by Allah unless it was a very important matter. He said, لو أن فاطمة بنت محمد سرقت لقطعت يدها. If Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, had committed theft, I will cut her hand. Meaning that the capital punishment, the rule of Allah applies to people across the spectrum of society. Doesn't matter. Daughter of the Nabi of Allah, doesn't matter. Theft, punishment will apply. And we saw this. We see this in one of the sons of Umar ibn Khattab. Capital punishment was applied to him. And he actually died as a result of it. Doesn't matter. And he was the Khalifa. That is the Sharia of Allah. Because then that becomes a deterrent, in the sense that the one who has some influence cannot rely on his influence to commit the crime, which is what we have. Today, people who are influential can do things and get away with it. Just very recently, there's talk about, take your pick, actually. You got statesman that is doing God knows what with, MP, and no, the Prime Minister, there was something about him doing some renovation work in number 10, and not declaring wallpaper. Yeah. Okay. Wallpaper and what have you, and not declaring it, and so why? Because I'm a person of influence, and so I can get away with certain, and it's called what? White collar crime. It's not actually, there's no punishment for it, and it's just one of the things that have to be accepted, and you just brush it under the carpet. Or if a celebrity does something, and because of their standing, they get away with it, it's okay, And it's almost like saying, we accept that you are going to do this because you are in this position, and so we'll look away for these. No. A person who enjoys a position in society or in a community is doing so because of their responsibility. Right? A prime minister enjoys all of this, security and honor and respect and what have you. Why? Because he's supposed to serve his subjects or the people under him. The MP likewise. It's not because you're born in a certain family or you've taken responsibility upon yourself. And so, you should not let yourself be deluded to think that you're special somehow, and because you are in a position of honor in society, you have a free ticket to do things that are not acceptable in general in that society. And ulama say that the person who commits theft, and we'll end with this, his tawbah will not be accepted. If he repents just between him and Allah, it will not be accepted until he returns what he stole, or at the very least finds a way of excusing himself. Let's say for example I've stolen something but spent it, and I can't, there's no way of giving it back. At the very least, asking forgiveness, acknowledging the mistake that you have made, and asking the person who you stole from, asking them to forgive you. Actually, I just thought of a story. Shall I tell you the story?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Tell you the story?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. They say that a righteous person was once walking past a field, and he was hungry. And, spur of the moment, hunger. He took an apple from a tree and he ate it. And then he realized, and he said, what am I doing? This does not belong to me. And so he went into the field looking for somebody. And so he met someone working there, and he said, oh, look, brother, I've taken this apple and I ate it. I was in extreme hunger, and please forgive me. He said, it doesn't belong to me. You'll have to go to the owner. I'm just an employee here. So he said, okay, where's the owner? He said, well, you go here, and gave him the address. So this person goes, turns up at the door, knocks on the door and says, I'm really sorry, I've taken an apple, one piece of fruit in a state of hunger. So the owner says, oh, well, the landlord or whatever, what would you call him? The owner of... Yeah. He said, no, I will not forgive you. Condition. He said, what is the condition? He says, I have a daughter that is blind, does not see, that is deaf, does not hear, that is dumb, does not speak, and she is paralyzed. And so if you want me to forgive you, then you have to marry this woman, this daughter of mine. And so the person thinks, Ya Allah, what have I done? It's only a fruit, man. But look at the conscience of akhirah. That, okay, a lifetime of, essentially he's not going to be a husband, he's going to be a servant, right? Because this woman, okay, yeah, nicer word, he's going to be a carer, but a servant. He's going to care with his heart, and he's going to serve with his... Yeah, he's going to have to care for this woman all his life, and the purpose of marriage is to help one another, right? But he's not going to gain anything from that relationship, at least not physically.
The price is not equivalent to the crime, is it?
Yeah, it is not.
Now, the owner of the farm asking for this man to marry his daughter,
Yeah.
in that condition,
Yeah.
for an apple.
Yeah.
I think he's asking too much.
Yeah, but wait for it. Wait for it. So he thinks for a moment, and then he thinks of the punishment of hellfire. And this is the basis, right? That Allah will not forgive something like this unless you have sought forgiveness from the person that you have done injustice towards. And so he agrees. And I said, okay, I will marry her. And so they do the nikah, aqd of nikah. And he after the nikah is done, he enters, to meet his wife. And so he just walks in and sits. Can you imagine the state of this guy? Like he just walks in and sits. And she says, Assalamu alaikum, will you not make salam? Ya Allah. Oh, she speaks. So he looks, she speaks, she hears, and actually she sees, and she's extremely beautiful, good looking. So he's shocked, and he says, well, maybe I've been framed. And he says, what's the story? Your father has said that you don't hear, you don't speak, you don't move. She says, yes, my father meant that I do not hear anything that is haram, and I do not see anything that is haram, and I do not speak anything that is haram, and I do not move towards anything that is haram or extend my hand to anything that is haram. And so this owner, when he saw that this person had this conscience of Allah, that for an apple he was willing to, and that was a test for him, right? But he was willing to pay the price of his deed here in dunya. Why? Because he wanted to save himself from the punishment of akhirah. And so they say from that couple there was a great sort of scholar, that was, yes, that was, yes, Ibrahim ibn Adham, they say, no. Allahu A'lam. But anyway, the moral of the story is, if you take something,
you have to ask forgiveness.
and this is from the hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that if anyone has done anyone else injustice, then he should seek to seek pardon from that person in this world, right? And pay what is due in this world before the day of Qiyamah. Because if the day of Qiyamah comes and you have not made peace with the person who you've taken something from, whether that is their life or their property or honor, by insulting them, then on the day of Qiyamah, Rasulullah says, you will have to pay back in this world or in the next. It's better to pay in this world, because in the next, here you're going to pay by either, maybe they're going to insult you back, or maybe they're going to ask of you, to pay something back, or a type of service. And that's all acceptable or bearable. But on the day of Qiyamah, there's no wealth. The only currency is what? Good deeds. Hasanat. And you will be asked to pay from your hasanat. And if your hasanat run out, or if you are so unfortunate not to have any hasanat, then some of their sins will be taken and placed on you. Even kuffar. Somebody will say, well, yes, it will lighten their punishment on the day of judgment. And everybody's seeking to enter paradise. And if they can't enter paradise, they're seeking a lighter punishment in hellfire. And so if they can dump some of their sins on you, they'll be very glad to do that. But obviously there is a justice also in akhirah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't mean that they can just take all of your hasanat. But imagine you have 10 people that claim against you. How many people do you deal with in your life? How many people you come across in your life? And so, if 10% of those people were to stand in a queue against you on the day of Qiyamah, what's that going to leave of your good deeds? Yeah? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala